Hello and welcome to part number 5 of the Blazor blog series. The big topic today is forms and validation. So we will use forms to create a new blog post, and if we've got enough time we will also make a web service call, meaning an HTTP post call to store that new blog post in the database. But before we start, one more thing I want to mention. If you want to dive deep into Blazor WebAssembly and you are into this new technology, then maybe you want to have a look at the Blazor WebAssembly Full Stack Bootcamp, an online course I created where you learn to create a classic online browser game where you can register as a user. We will use token authentication to authenticate a user, and then you can create an army of fighters like knights, mages, and archers, and then fight against other users and climb the leaderboard to become the best warrior of them all. So maybe you want to have a look. And one last thing, if you like this series and want to support my channel, I'd really appreciate it if you click the like button or even subscribe. Okay, thank you, and enough with that. Now let's continue with the Blazor blog series. The very first thing we need is a form, of course, so we will create a new page. So let's go to the Solution Explorer. There it is. Right click Pages and then add a new Razor component, and we call this thing simply create, because we want to create a new blog post with that. This is a page, so we have to add the page directive, and the route for that is simply create, and maybe change the title to create a new blog post like that. And then we have two options. We can either start with the actual form now or write something into the code block. We need both. I suggest we start with the edit form. Now with the edit form we will add new controls or built-in components of Blazor WebAssembly, like an input text field, input date, and so on. You will see this in a minute. And this edit form also needs some attributes. And for that we have to add some code into the code block. The very first thing we need is the actual blog post we want to create. So we need an object for that. So let's add the Blazor block shared blog posts, which is a new blog post like that maybe. And then there's also a function we have to add to the code block, because the edit form is a form in essence, and there is also this thing called submit. So we have a button at the end of this form, and this is a submit button, and with this button we want to call an actual function. So let's add this function here, call it create new blog post. And at the beginning the only thing this method should do is write something into the console. So maybe create that blog post. All right, so we have our object here, and we call this writeLine, not writeLog, but we want to write something into the console. In JavaScript it's console log, so maybe that's why I was a bit confused. Anyways, with this function we write in the console of the browser, create that blog post. Okay, that's great. And now we can add these things here to the edit form. So first we need a model, and this then will be the new blog post. Don't forget to add the @ sign here. And then also we need a function that is called on a valid submits, and here we use create new blog post without the @ sign. All right, that's it already for the beginning of the form. And to see something, let's already create add the button, the submit button, and this is simply a button of type submit. Since we are using Bootstrap here, we can also add a class that is already available, like button primary, and we call this create, like that. And then one more thing I want to change is the menu here, because then we are able to access this page and we actually don't need the fetch data page anymore. And we can just change the href here to create, call this create, and the plus sign actually fits quite nice, I think. So let's save that. We changed the nav menu, added the create button, or the button to the create page. We have the create page here, and I think this thing should be done now. Great, let's have a look. Back to the block. We see the create link here. Let's go there. Beautiful. We have the page, create a new blog post, and the create button. And now when we have a look at the console and click create that blog post. Okay, nice. So there is actually a form. I know you don't see anything of that form except the button maybe. And this form is valid. And that's why we call the function here, create that blog post, is logged or displayed into the console. Whew. Okay, that's nice. And well, now the next thing is to actually add some components or controls to the actual form. So let's start maybe with an input, and for that we put that input into a div. This div gets a class. This is a form group. This thing gets a label, and we will give the input the ID title, and that's why this label is also for the title. We add title above the input, and now comes the input text. You can close this already. The ID, as mentioned, is title. And then we have to bind a value to this input. See, that's data binding in essence. And this will be the new blog post title. And we can also give this thing a class. This is a form control, like that. You see, this is the model we needed, and here we say, okay, this is the title of that model. Let's have a look already if this worked. Do we have to reload by ourselves now? No. Let's see, create razor. What's happening here? Or did it not recognize the change? Could be, I don't know. We got the div. Everything seems to be correct. Maybe we can build this. It's building now. Holy crap, what's going on here? You know what? Maybe just stop this thing. Start it again. Welcome to my blog posts. Create, and there it is. And if you try it here again, now it's working. Okay. Let me just do one other test. Okay, it recognized the change. Rebuilding. Takes some time. Reloading. Okay, we have to create one. So, I don't know, there was some kind of building issue, but that was a problem of Visual Studio, I guess. The code was correct. And I'd say let's continue. So you can see here now we see our actual title. We can enter some text, we can click create. The outline is green because everything is valid. Well, we did not add any validator, but still, this works so far. So let's add some other properties. I'd say we can also add the URL, of course. So this is going to be the URL, and yes, I just copied all this stuff because it's quite the same. URL. Another thing we can add is the description. Description, and also the description here and there. And then comes another component, which would be a text area for the content. So this would be the content, also here and here. And then another component would be the input date for the created date of the blog post. Date created. And then one last thing I'd say would be a checkbox. Now that's a bit different. We need another class, which is the form check class. I guess it looks better when we put the label at the bottom. It is an input checkbox now. The ID is published. We can call this publish maybe, and that's the property is published. All right, this should be it. Let's have a look. Still rebuilding. And when this is done, we recap this a little. Wow, this is big. Maybe I have to change the class here. Yes, this is a form check input. Okay, let's have a look again. It's rebuilding, although that's also why not? If you are into these big checkboxes, maybe you just leave the class there. Now it looks a bit better, I think. So you see, this is our form. That was quick, right? We've got input text boxes for the title, the URL, and the description, and then we added a text area for the content. And don't get confused by this thing here. You see, this is just a Grammarly extension for Chrome. And we've got the date. The great thing is, since we already initialized the date by datetime now, we get the current day for the date control already, and we really got a date picker here, which is quite nice, I think. And then also we've got the checkbox. Now there are some other components, of course. Again, if you want to dive deeper into that in the Blazor WebAssembly Full Stack Bootcamp, we are covering all the built-in components of Blazor WebAssembly. But anyways, this looks quite nice, and we can also hit the button and see create that blog post. And back to the code, you can see how we did this. We've got the input text fields here, the input text area. All the time we need the model to bind the value. And then we also got the input date and the input checkbox. There's also an input select field, for instance. And with .NET 5, which is really around the corner, I think it's coming out tomorrow actually, and then there will be even more. Okay, so far the form, and the next thing already would be validation. And as you have already seen, these things here are green when, or here you see the date, these things are really green when we enter something. And now we want to change that. Now validation is a big topic actually. There are lots of validators, lots of attributes we can use to validate our model, but let's start from the beginning. So what we have to do is first go to the model actually that is used. So in our case, the blog post, and here we can add some attributes. For instance, the title. The title should be something that is definitely required. So we simply add required. Again, don't get confused by this thing. We don't need this. We need required. It is an attribute, but we need only the term required here. And you see that Visual Studio doesn't know what this thing is. So let's hit Control and period. And then you see that we can install the package system component model annotations. And yes, we want to find and install the latest version. If you're using VS Code, I guess you have to do this manually, but that's not a problem. In the terminal, then you can add .NET add package, .NET add package, and then enter system component model annotations. And this will also install the required or necessary package. And now it says, I know what this is. The required attributes, and we can already save this, or we did save this already, and it's rebuilding, and then we see maybe something, or we don't. Let's have a look. Take some time today to rebuild the whole project. Or is some, no, there's something wrong. Yeah, maybe you have to rebuild this whole thing, because we added the new package here, data annotations. Let's see. Let's save this maybe. Watch started. And in a second, this should work again. There it is, rebuilding, great. When I now click create, it's still creating that blog post. And it says that everything is okay here. Now, why is that? Well, we have to add something to the actual form again. So we're telling the model now that the title is created, but the form doesn't know that. And to tell the form, we have to add the data annotations validator, and we can already close this tag. And now with the data annotations validator, well, it adds data annotations validation support to a Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components form edit context. And that's what the edit form actually is. So let's save this now. It is rebuilding, and then the validation should work. Fingers crossed. Okay, reloading. And when I now click create, you see the red outline. Now that's nice. Now it's green, but I think we can do something more. So let's go back to blog post. And the only thing I want to add here now is also required for the URL, and also something else, which is the maximum length of the string. And we can do that with string length. And here you can see we can add a maximum length for that. Let's just save this. And also already another thing I want to add is an actual message to the form. So we see the red outline already, that's nice, but what about some more information? The user does not really know what is actually wrong with that field. And we can do that with the validation summary. So with the validation summary, the whole form gets validated, of course, and then it will tell us what is actually wrong with our form. And it is still rebuilding, and now it's reloading. Beautiful. And if we now click create, we see the URL field is required, and also the title field is required. If I add a title now, new post, we see that the URL field is required, but we added something like string length 20, so maybe this URL is way too long. Create, and it tells us the field URL must be a string with a maximum length of 20. And now it works. Great. Okay, what else can we do? We can add a custom error message. This would be the first thing maybe. As you might have already seen here, there's this attribute error message, and let's just use this thing. So maybe you can tell the model something like, please use only 20 characters. Save this. And then this message should be used. But there's also another thing we can do, what I really like, but let's have a look. We add a little text here, and now you see, please use only 20 characters. That's nice. But now the last thing I like is not using or not only using the validation summary. I like to see an error message below the actual form component. And of course we can do something like that with the help of the validation message right here. You can already close it, and this we have to tell for, well, we have to tell the validation message tag or component what it is for, and we do that with a function and the lambda expression like that. I know it looks crazy, but well, that's how it is. And here we can just tell the validation message that this is for the title, and we can add the same thing for the URL. Save this. And of course you can add it to any other component here. And when this is done, the page will reload. If you now click create, you see we have the summary down here, and also below the title field we see that the title is required and also the URL is required. We can add a title now, and we can again add a way too long URL. This is a way too long URL. Hit return, and now it's telling us please use only 20 characters. And now this thing works. Isn't that nice? That's actually it. Well, it's a start, right? So we got the form, we got validation. Of course, we could add validation to the other controls or components as well. There are lots of different things we can add. We can, for instance, add a password confirmation when we register users. So comparing two texts or two input text fields, and then tell the user if the content of these text fields is the same. We could validate a checkbox and say that this checkbox has to be checked. Maybe if you want to read some terms or want the user to read some terms and accept them, then you can do that, and so on. But I think that's enough for that. You could go very deep. Again, maybe you want to have a look at the bootcamp. There we do some more of the forms and validation stuff. But enough with that. I don't want to tell you everything every minute to go to the course. Anyways, we've got some time left, so that's why I would say that we also create a post in the database. And for that we have to go to the service. So we've got the forms, we've got the validation, and now let's create a blog post with the help of the blog service. We add another method here. Again, I would like to return the blog post, just because we actually don't have to return the blog post, but let's just do that. Then we can see that this thing comes back and we can just access it and the URL again. You will see this in a minute. So create new blog post should be the name of this method, and the requests we send to the web service is an actual blog post. So create new blog post, and now we go to the implementation class, the blog service, and create this new method, create new blog post. And here we add something like about results. Since this is an asynchronous method, we call await. We already got the HTTP client here, and then this time posts as JSON, not get post, because this will be an HTTP post call. And then we add API block and add the request object, which will be the blog post model. And after that we return await and then results, because this thing is the HTTP response message. And from that we got some content, and then we can read this as JSON or from JSON async and say this will be a blog post. We know that. And that's it. Okay. So the blog service will return this blog post here. And then we can call this method in the create page. Down here we can remove the console write line. Or first we need the blog post, of course. So first we inject Blazor blog client services I blog service. This is our blog service. And now we save our results equals, just a sec, we have to make this async because we want to call an asynchronous method. So our result await blog service create new blog post, and here now we give this method our model, the new blog post. And after that I want to do something new. I want to navigate the user to this new blog post, and for that we need the navigation manager. Quite simple. You just inject the navigation manager and call this thing also navigation manager. And now down here we call navigation manager navigate to, and then the URL, which would be posts, and then the URL of the result, like that. Okay, this should be it. Now, of course, we could have just used the URL of this model here in the new blog post, but in that case, we do some kind of round trip. So we create the new blog post. It comes back. For instance, if we would use the ID here, we would have to do it like that, because only then we would have the valid ID, because in the database it will be generated. Here, when we create this new blog post in the form, we don't have an ID. I know in this case we've got the URL, but anyways, maybe the service would change the URL because we already have the same URL in the database, and it would just add a number, or it would add a number for any reason, I don't know. In that case, we can be sure that this is the result of the web service and the database, and then we can navigate the user to that post. But of course, there's one more thing missing, and that would be the controller. So the controller needs that method, of course, to create a new blog post. And let's go to the controller now. There it is, the blog controller. And now we create a post method, not a get anymore. Now we add a post method, and this thing will also be public async now, and you will see why in a second. But then it will also return an action result with a blog post again, and we create we call this thing again create new blog post with a blog post as request object, quite the same as in the service. And now, how do we create a new object to the database? Well, we've got our context, and we just say add requests. And that's it, right? Well, one more thing is missing, and that's why I want to use an asynchronous method here. We could do it synchronously, but let's do it asynchronously. Context, save changes, async. And now with that, we will save the new blog post in the database and also generate an ID. And it's not done with the add call with this one here. It really is done with save changes async. So if you want to create an object in the database and then use something of that new object make sure to call save changes async, because after that it really is stored in the database and it will generate an ID, for instance. Well, an ID is the best example I can think of right now, so yeah. And in the end we return the request again, because this thing should now have the ID again. Okay, I think now you got this. And one more thing, we add HTTP posts. So this is now a post call, create new blog post, and the URL would be then just the controller, API controller, but using the HTTP method post. Okay, and I think we're done. Back to the service again, we see API blog. Yes, this is the name of the controller. And we give this the request object, which is the blog post. We call post as JSON async with the URL API blog, and this is our object here. And then we read from JSON async that blog post. And then we go one step further in the create page. We call this method here, create new blog posts, and after that we navigate the user to posts and then the URL of the result. All right, let's see. Let's go back to the blog. Should be the latest version here. Let's call this breaking news. And also add this URL, breaking news, a great description, and even better content. It will be published directly, so let's hit create. And there is, it does work. We see in the network tab that it's making a post call here. This is the request method post. 200 OK comes back. This is the object with ID 0, as you can see here. And then there comes something back with ID 2. And after that, we see that our blog wants to navigate to the new created blog post, breaking news, and even better content. So this works quite nice. And to have a look at the database, let me just open the database in the SQLite browser. There it is. We browse the data and here we see the breaking news. That's it. I know I forgot about the author, but well, that's not that important, I guess. So we got all covered: forms, validation, and we made a post call. I hope you liked this part of the blog series, the Blazor blog series. If so, please click the like button or even subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to click the bell icon to get to get a notification if the new part is online. And again, if you want to dive deeper, another commercial for the Blazor WebAssembly Full Stack Bootcamp. I would really appreciate it if you have a look. There's also a 2-hour preview available here on YouTube. We dive really deep. We built an online browser game with lots of stuff, almost 10 hours of content. Well, there will be more than 10 hours soon, because with .NET 5 around the corner, I will add an update, maybe even a complete new project. So then you will see how to create a Blazor WebAssembly full stack application with .NET Core 3.1 and also .NET 5 with Visual Studio 2019 and also with Visual Studio Code. So it's completely cross-platform. Maybe you want to have a look. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you very much for watching and happy coding. I see you next time.